Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, we're going to talk about what fearful avoidants need to do to heal to have a healthy relationship. Now, you don't necessarily need to, but it is beneficial and it will usually create a nice roadmap to a healthy relationship and create stability within other relationships and yourself. I'm going to make this video for all three of the the insecure attachment styles. So I don't know which one's going to be posted first, second, third, but for particularly with fearful avoidance, sometimes what can help is if you lean a certain way, you can watch that other video as well. So if you're fearful avoidant, but you feel like you're strongly dismissive avoidant, some pieces in the dismissive avoidant video may help you. Or if you feel like you might lean anxious, watching some of that and processing some of the things I shared in that video also might help. And so we're not going to talk about the trauma, particularly with the fearful avoidant. Fearful avoidant is, I feel, probably would be the longest video. Well, it depends because there's so many components, and a lot of you guys also have a lot of trauma in comparison, as I've shared many times. Usually fearful avoidance score the highest on adverse childhood experiences scale. And so that would mean that you guys have probably seen a lot of things that other attachment styles not as much. Usually if somebody has extensive amount of trauma, they tend to be fearful avoidant based on the research. And so we're not going to talk about healing those things. That's something you may have to process in another way. And I will probably make a video on that at some point, either this channel or my other channel. But today we're going to talk about the emotional skills, just basic emotional skills, not very deep, about what you can add to your relationship to have a more healthy relationship. The first one is actually emotional regulation skills. And what I mean by that is fearful avoidants tend to experience emotions intensely, but also suddenly. It's not actually sudden. I'm going to explain that in a little bit, but usually it's like fear, anger, or shame. And the sudden component of it is that originally you're suppressing it, usually the avoidant part of you, but not always. Sometimes it's because you're too embarrassed or ashamed to admit that. Anxious preoccupied does that as well. But because the emotions feel very rejected or very hurt, or you feel like you kind of remember all the traumatic experiences you have subconsciously with emotions in general, you're almost fighting some of the memories that you have and fighting the childhood you've experienced. So let's say, for example, when you were younger, you were not allowed to have emotions, but the house was very volatile anyway. So it's almost like you were told not to have emotions, but it was a very emotional, dysregulated space. So sometimes you did also dysregulate yourself, or you learned that that's okay as long as most of the time you're suppressed. That's how you looked at it. And so that's why this happens, right? It suppresses and then it just comes out of nowhere. And usually why that happens is because you haven't built enough tolerance around the strong emotions that you're feeling, because in your family, it's like you would shut it down and then some people would just crash out whenever. And a lot of times with fearful avoidance, you would brush under the rug of what's really happening in the family. And so it was just allowed to sometimes have crash outs and then pretend it never happened, or people would grudge against each other. A lot of fearful avoidance, they grew up in families where everybody was like an enemy to each other at one point. So like all the children, they would gang up against one, or now the other one's like, no one's friends. No one is all connected or safe or happy together under the same roof. Like, let's say you guys are a family of 4. At least one person is the bad guy for that day or that month. And then sometimes it switches. That's usually how the family works. And so fearful avoidance, they're very paranoid of if they're that person, or how to not be that person, or if they are that person, they have to be, very vigilant, whatever it is. Like they are very on edge all the time. And so emotional intensities are incredibly common. And so building tolerance for strong emotions without reacting can be helpful. And how you do that is usually naming the feeling instead of acting, and then staying present during conflict instead of dissociating or having those emotions. And usually it also can be helpful if you do that you apologize and take accountability, so that you are subconsciously and now consciously saying that you're going to actively work on it. Just a brief overview, but it's something that maybe you guys can look into even more, and I'll talk about it again on my channel. The next one is communicating your needs directly instead of testing, withdrawing, or beating around the bush. So many fearful avoidants beat around the bush because they feel like if they say it completely directly, they can get reprimanded or yelled at, but if they don't say it at all and they get caught, they can get in trouble. And so they do this technique where it's like they say it halfway, but it's not because they're trying to get you to read their mind sometimes, but normally it's because they feel like they have to. That's how they're supposed to say it. They say it halfway to test the waters and see how you're going to react, and see it like just kind of like throw some phrases out there and see if it sticks. Because if they say it fully, they'll get yelled at. But if they don't say it at all, then they're also going to get yelled at. Sometimes fearful avoidants grew up like that, and that's very common. And so that's why you do that if you are a fearful avoidant. And so understand that that's not normal. People should not treat you like that. And so instead of behaving or communicating that way, communicate more directly about your needs. And if someone doesn't take it, then you say, okay, we can talk about it another time. Or depending on how you feel about that person, if it's not that important, then you can either leave the relationship or let go of whatever need you were communicating. But I would say the best one, if they didn't hear you out, talk about it another time, because they might be in a mood too. And so that's really important. The next one is ask for space when you need it without completely shutting yourself away, and also not using space continuously when you get dysregulated. Fearful avoidants do this thing where they're like, I need space, and then they kind of go away and they realize, wait a second, I don't need space, and then they want to pull back in, and then they get anxious. And so that's why that push-pull cycle happens, because they ask for space before processing if they actually need space, because their go-to is I need space, but sometimes they don't need space, or they don't need it that badly. And so what I think is important is ask for space when you absolutely need it. And when you absolutely need it, take that actual space without shutting yourself off, without breaking up. But if you feel like you're just a little dysregulated, find other ways to regulate yourself. Take a walk, take a shower, whatever it is, without taking this huge amount of I need space, right? The next one is being more comfortable with discomfort in general. Slowly ease into discomfort and sit with it for a little by little. The next one is stop leaving emotionally before you leave physically. Leaving a relationship is a process, and it does take time. And so often, if you are really leaving, you will leave sometimes emotionally before you leave physically. But sometimes what happens with fearful avoidance is they don't actually think if the relationship is actually good or bad. Sometimes they do, but they've decided that it is not good for whatever reason. And sometimes they're right, and they have processed that, okay, this relationship isn't great. Maybe I'm never going to leave, but I'm going to leave emotionally. I made a video on that. Fearful avoidants do that. And they don't actually look at what the relationship is. They think, okay, I've given up. There's no potential here. Let me just check out. Maybe I'll stay. Maybe I'll leave. And that's just where they stay. And then once they do that, usually nothing can change their mind, which is frustrating for their partner, because the partner may actually be trying to change. It was just slower than what the fearful avoidant wanted. So if you are feeling this way, I would recommend that don't make it such a solid decision. If you're feeling that way, but your partner is giving some signs that they are doing better, or they're trying to make it work, let them take that time to build your trust again. Don't just never give trust ever again. That's what I would say about that piece. And the last one is stop shaming yourself after emotional reactions. Fearful avoidance and shame work really close together. Unfortunately, sometimes it's like you guys are best buddies, but it's like a toxic, unhealthy friendship. You think that shame puts you in your place, and your emotional reaction was wrong. And the reason that you feel like that is because your caregivers probably told you after you had an emotional reaction, they shamed you for it. That's not healthy. And then you feel embarrassed, and sometimes you over apologize, or sometimes you won't even over apologize. You'll suddenly become very detached and trying to put your emotions away completely because you're so hurt about the emotional reaction you have. Just take a moment to realize that if a person really does care about you, or if they're just mentally healthy, they're going to just let go of that emotional reaction you have. Everybody has them to some extent. And so don't be so hard on yourself. So let's go ahead and summarize, and then we'll wrap it up. Building emotional regulation skills, which we talked about. Communicating needs directly. Asking for space when you actually need it, not just every time your go-to. And then get more comfortable with discomfort. The fifth one is stop leaving emotionally before physically, and process it if you really want to leave, as well as if that person is trying to change, give them the benefit of the doubt. And the last one is stop shaming yourself after an emotional reaction. I hope this video is helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.